The summer of 1988 in Tokyo started like any other. Children played in parks, families enjoyed festivals, and life moved at its normal pace. But by the end of August, everything had changed. Parents began locking their doors earlier. Children stopped playing outside alone. The reason was simple and terrifying. Someone was hunting the city's youngest residents. What this person did to those innocent victims was so shocking that even veteran detectives who had seen countless crimes found themselves unable to sleep at night. At first, the police believed it might be just one terrible incident, a single tragic disappearance that would be solved quickly. But it soon became clear that something much worse was happening. A dangerous person was hunting in their city, someone who carried a camera everywhere. Someone who recorded everything they did. This person was Tsutomu Miyazaki. He was not the kind of man who stood out in a crowd. He stayed in the shadows, away from people's attention. He was pale and thin, with hands that looked different because of a condition he was born with. He rarely looked people in the eyes and almost never spoke to anyone. But when he was alone, behind locked doors, he was creating a twisted world where he had complete control. A world where his victims could never fight back or tell anyone what happened to them. To understand how he became this way, we need to go back to 1962. Tsutomu was born into a wealthy family. His father owned a successful printing business in Itabashi. The family had money and respect in their community. But physically, Tsutomu was different from other children. His hands could not move the way normal hands do. He could not bend his wrist properly, which made simple tasks difficult. Other children at school noticed his strange hands and made fun of him constantly. They called him names and pushed him around. To escape from this cruel treatment, he spent most of his time alone, reading manga comics, watching anime cartoons, and viewing horror movies. In these stories, the monsters were always powerful, and the weak characters always suffered. His family life did not help him feel better about himself. His father was cold and seemed embarrassed to have a son who looked different. His mother had serious mental health problems and could not take care of him properly. His sisters stayed away from him and treated him like he was invisible. The only person in his family who showed him any love was his grandfather. When his grandfather died, Tsutomu fell apart completely. On the day of the funeral, people say he went to the room where his grandfather's ashes were kept. He took some of the ashes and ate them. He believed this would keep part of his grandfather alive inside his own body. This is not how normal people deal with sadness and loss. By 1988, Tsutomu had become someone who never left his room. He lived in a small, dirty space filled with garbage. The walls were covered with shelves, and those shelves were packed with thousands of videotapes. He had horror films, anime shows, and illegal videos. Some of these tapes were things he had made himself. That summer, something inside his mind finally broke completely. On August 22nd, 1988, a 4-year-old girl named Mari Kono was walking alone to visit a friend. She never arrived at her destination. Miyazaki saw her playing near a river and offered to drive her to her friend's house. She was just a little child and thought he was trying to help her, so she got into his car. No one ever saw her alive again. He drove her to a quiet forest area outside Tokyo where no one would find them. There, he killed her with his bare hands by squeezing her neck until she could not breathe anymore. But he did not leave right away. He stayed with her body and took photographs. Then he left her in the forest and came back later with more camera equipment and a knife. He cut off parts of her body and took them home with him. He put her hands in a plastic bag and kept them in his closet like they were special objects. He collected her blood in bottles and drank it over several days. Weeks later, he returned to the forest and gathered some of her bones. He burned these bones himself and then put them in a box. He mailed this box to Mari's family, along with her teeth and school uniform. Inside the package, he included a strange letter with random words that did not make sense together. The words said things like, Mari, cold, cough, throat, rest, death. Mari's family thought someone was playing a sick joke on them. But when police tested the bones, they discovered they were real parts of their daughter. On October 3rd, he found his second victim. This time it was 7-year-old Masami Yoshizawa. He used the same trick to get her into his car by telling her lies about helping her. After he killed her, he left her body in the hills outside the city. But before he left, he took many photographs of her body. This became part of his ritual. He later told police that he enjoyed looking at these pictures while watching horror movies. He would imagine that the victims were talking to him from the photographs. By this time, Miyazaki's crimes had become about more than just having power over someone. He had developed an obsession with dead bodies and cutting them apart. What he did to these children was so terrible that investigators decided not to tell newspapers about all the details. They were afraid that if people knew everything, it would cause panic and might give other dangerous people ideas. In December 1988, he tricked 4-year-old Erika Namba into getting into his car, using the same lies he had used before. After he killed her, he wrapped her body in a blanket and left it on a stranger's front porch like it was some kind of gift. Then he called her family on the telephone without telling them who he was. He told her parents exactly where they could find their daughter. They thought it was someone making a cruel joke until they opened their front door and saw the blanket. He had taken photographs of this too, just like everything else he did. Then, in June 1989, he found his final victim. Her name was Ayako Nomoto, and she was only 5 years old. This time, he convinced her to get into his car while it was parked in a remote area where no one could see them. After he killed her, he did something even more horrible than before. He took her body to his home, where he spent the next 2 days making videos of her dead body. He cut her apart and stored pieces of her in his refrigerator like they were food. Later, he burned most of her remains and threw the ashes in the mountains. But he kept her hands, just like he had done with his first victim. Just 1 month later, in July 1989, police finally caught him. He was trying to take inappropriate photographs of 2 other young girls in a park when their father saw what he was doing and called for help. When police arrested him, they had no idea who they had caught or what he had been doing. But when they searched his home, they realized they had walked into a place that was like a museum of death and suffering. They found thousands of videotapes and dozens of recordings he had made himself. There were photographs of all his victims, drawings he had made, pieces of clothing, bones, and other body parts. In one plastic bag, they found Ayako's hands, which had been partially preserved like they were ancient artifacts. He had put them in a special box and built a small shrine around it, like he was worshipping them. The case shocked everyone in Japan, not just because of what he had done, but because of how calm and emotionless he seemed about it. When police questioned him, Miyazaki said that everything was the fault of a second personality that lived inside his mind. He called this other personality Ratman. He claimed that Ratman had forced him to commit these crimes. He also said he saw things that were not really there. One doctor who examined him said he had multiple personality disorder. Another doctor believed he had schizophrenia. a serious mental illness. But the courts did not believe these explanations. They decided that he was mentally capable of understanding right from wrong, which meant he was legally responsible for his crimes. They said he was not mentally ill, just deeply evil. His trial began in 1990 and lasted almost 7 years. During all that time, Miyazaki barely spoke in court. He never said he was sorry for what he had done. When people confronted him with evidence of his crimes, he seemed confused about why everyone was so upset. He told investigators that he believed he was actually helping the girls by preserving their innocence. In his twisted mind, he thought they were still alive in the videotapes he had made. In 1997, the court sentenced him to death. 11 years later, on June 17, 2008, Tsutomu Miyazaki was executed by hanging in Tokyo. He was not just a killer. He was someone who documented death like it was entertainment. He collected suffering like other people collect stamps. He looked like an ordinary man, but he had turned real life into his own personal horror movie. It was almost 2 o'clock in the morning on a hot, humid August night in 1982. A young man who worked at a photo development shop in Hong Kong's crowded Mong Kok district was getting ready to finish his shift. He opened a plain envelope that had been dropped off earlier, expecting to see vacation pictures or wedding photos like he processed every day. Instead, under the bright light of his work lamp, he saw something that would give him nightmares for the rest of his life. The film strip showed a woman's body, but she was not alive, and she was not whole. Someone had carefully cut her apart and arranged the pieces like they were creating some kind of sick artwork for their own private collection. The technician's hands were shaking so badly he could barely hold the telephone when he called the police. By the time the sun came up, Hong Kong police were racing through the neon-lit streets toward the address written on the film envelope. The name on the envelope belonged to Lam Kor-wan, a taxi driver whose neighbors all said the same thing about him. He was polite, quiet, and so ordinary that you would forget you had ever met him. Nobody knew that inside a tiny apartment high above the busy streets was a hidden room where nightmares came to life. Nobody knew that a man who seemed completely normal was hunting the city's daughters while everyone else was sleeping. Lam Kor-wan was born in 1955 to a working-class family that struggled to make ends meet. His father was a mechanic who believed that children should be controlled through fear and punishment. Lam was the oldest son, but being the firstborn did not bring him any special treatment or affection. From the time he was very small, he learned to obey his father through beatings and humiliation. Neighbors remembered him as the boy who never spoke up for himself. He would stand behind his father like a shadow whenever the older man was yelling at shopkeepers or scolding his other children in public. At school, he stayed on the edges of every classroom and every playground. Teachers would mark his name on the attendance sheet, but they rarely noticed whether he was actually there or not. He managed to get average grades, but he never made any real friends. When he did speak, which was not often, his words sounded strange and rehearsed, like he had practiced them in a mirror rather than just saying what he was thinking. There was no sign yet of the darkness that was growing inside his mind, hidden behind his blank expression. In 1973, desperate to become someone other than the invisible son who disappointed his father, Lam joined the Royal Hong Kong Police Force. For a brief moment, wearing the uniform gave him a taste of what it felt like to have respect and power. But this feeling did not last long. Just a few months later, he was quietly removed from the police force. The official reason given was misconduct, but people whispered about other things. They said he had suffered some kind of mental breakdown. They said he had shown interest in things that a young police officer should never have been curious about. Whatever the real truth was, Lam had lost the only position of authority he had ever managed to obtain. After that, he moved from job to job without ever finding anything that satisfied him. He tried working in factories and doing odd jobs for people, but nothing seemed to fit. Finally, he got a license to drive a taxi. This gave him permission to drive all night through a city that never slept. It also gave him the perfect opportunity to watch people, learn their habits, and slip through the cracks of society without being noticed. During the day, he was the polite cab driver behind the steering wheel, nodding at customers in his rearview mirror and making small talk about the weather. But at night, when he was alone in his cramped apartment, he would sit staring at anatomy books and medical diagrams. Later, he started looking at photographs that he had secretly taken of passengers who had fallen asleep in his cab, and women he had followed on the street. He began bringing home tools, knives, glass jars, and camera equipment. He learned how to develop film in a makeshift darkroom he built in his bathroom. He made detailed plans and practiced different techniques. In the summer of 1981, those plans finally turned into action. Lam began hunting for victims like a fisherman, casting lines into dark water. Late at night, he would cruise the streets looking for women who were alone and vulnerable. He targeted shop workers who were finishing late shifts, students heading home from night classes, and hostesses who were done with another evening working in neon-lit bars. Sometimes he would offer them a cheap ride home when other taxis were hard to find. Sometimes he would promise them extra money if they would pose for some photographs. He always looked so ordinary and harmless. He wore wire-rimmed glasses and spoke in a soft voice. He had a small smile that made him seem like someone who could never hurt anyone. When they got into his taxi, the bright lights of the city would blur into streaks of color as he drove. Lam would take them through quiet streets, making sure no one was following or watching. Then he would drive to his apartment building, usually with some excuse about needing to stop for a moment. Maybe he would say he needed to get money from his room, or he needed to pick up his camera equipment. He would invite them to come inside and wait. They rarely said no because he seemed so safe and trustworthy. Once they were inside his apartment, the door would lock behind them. The windows were already covered with thick black curtains that blocked out all the light from the street. In that silence, with the city's noise completely cut off, Lam's polite mask would disappear. He would kill them quickly and methodically, always being careful not to make noise that might alert the neighbors. He was always careful not to leave evidence that someone might find. But death was never the end for Lam's victims. After they were gone, he would carry their bodies to a corner of his bedroom where he had set up a workbench under harsh fluorescent lights. There, he would turn his tiny room into his own private morgue. He would pose the bodies in different positions and take photographs from every possible angle. He studied them the way a scientist studies specimens under a microscope, taking them apart piece by piece. Some parts he would preserve in glass jars, sealing them carefully and writing labels like they were rare scientific samples. But he always kept souvenirs too. Purses, scarves, earrings, and other small personal items that still smelled faintly of perfume. These were his reminders that these women had once walked the same streets as everyone else in the city. After each murder, Lam would wash his hands carefully, clean all his tools, and go back to driving his taxi as if nothing had happened. He would pick up drunk businessmen stumbling out of bars, tired workers heading home from late shifts, and young couples who were walking home together. These passengers would sit just inches away from the same seat where a victim had sat just hours before. They never knew what the quiet man behind the steering wheel had done in the darkness. Between 1981 and 1982, 4 young women disappeared into his private world of horror. Their families reported them missing to the police, but the officers assumed they had probably run away from home. Nobody looked twice at the shy taxi driver with thick glasses who seemed so harmless. He was invisible, which was exactly how he wanted it. He might have stayed invisible forever if he had not made one crucial mistake. In August 1982, Lam brought a roll of film to a photo lab for development. Maybe he had become so confident in his invisibility that he did not think twice about the risk. Maybe he wanted to see his trophies printed on glossy paper, clearer than the dark images he developed at home in his bathroom. Whatever his reason was, that single envelope destroyed everything he had built. When the lab technician saw those images, he did not hesitate for even a second. He immediately called the police and told them what he had found. The police traced the film back to Lam's taxi license, and from there to his apartment address. When officers knocked on his door, Lam did not try to run away or hide. He opened the door politely, just like he was greeting another pair of passengers who needed a ride somewhere in the city. When they asked to come inside, he let them in without any resistance. What they found inside was what newspapers would later call a house of horrors. Glass jars lined the shelves like trophies in a trophy case. Photographs were stacked in neat piles, each one carefully labeled and organized by date. There were notebooks filled with names, dates, and detailed descriptions of what he had done. In a locked drawer, they found all the tools he had used to cut his victims apart. Everything was there, organized and preserved like a museum exhibition. Lam did not try to deny anything when they confronted him with the evidence. He confessed calmly and completely, describing exactly how he had done everything, when he had done it, and why he had kept all the pieces. He spoke about it the same way someone might describe their hobby or their job. Reporters who covered the case could not decide what was more disturbing, the horrific photographs or Lam's complete lack of emotion when he explained what he had done. The families of the missing women sat in the courtroom in complete silence, listening to details that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. Hong Kong had seen brutal crimes before, but nothing like this quiet man who had turned his own bedroom into both a slaughterhouse and a shrine. In 1984, Lam Kor-wan was sentenced to death, though his punishment was later changed to life in prison. He is now 70 years old and continues to serve his life sentence at the maximum security Shek Pik prison on Lantau Island. The case remains one of Hong Kong's most notorious crimes, a reminder that the most dangerous predators are often the ones who hide in plain sight, looking like everyone else.